Let's see, the recorder is recording, so I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Cassie Beard. It is a pleasure to have you on. Thank you
It's a
very much
pleasure to
for
be here.
making the time. I know we've talked about it for a little while, and you had the flu that's been going around the low country, but I'm glad you got your
Man, it
voice
was
back.
rough. Yes, finally, mostly back at least. Hopefully, I don't hack my way through this, but we'll see.
Now, you are, so everybody knows, in case they listen to this and they're either in the area, they're going to be coming to the area, and they want to come see you because they're going to learn how great you are, like we all know that you are. But you're at Dermatology Association with the Low Country, and y'all have
Yep,
3 different offices.
3 offices. Yep, there's one in Hilton Head, one in Ladies Island, and one in Okatee.
Very good. And you spend time at each one on different days of the week, or do you go different?
I personally spend my time in 2 of the 3 offices, but we do have somebody in all 3 offices. Yes.
Very cool. Now, the one thing I didn't realize, and I've known you for a number of years since you moved here, I didn't know that your degree was in osteopath first, and then
Yep.
dermatology specialty, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. I went to an osteopathic medical school in Arizona. It's AT University. My school was School of Osteopathic Medicine in Arizona, so a big mouthful. But I spent 1 year on campus there in Arizona, and then my school took me here to the Low Country to do all my clinical rotations and to finish medical school. So that's kind of how I fell in love with this area. So after graduating osteopathic medical school, I then went to residency in dermatology in Jacksonville.
Was Andrew Weil, was he associated with your osteopath school?
No,
Do you know
not
who
that
he
I'm
is?
familiar with.
He's been around a long time. This is going back 25 years ago. One night I woke up, couldn't sleep at 2 or 3 in the morning. I turned the TV on, and here's this big guy with this bald head and giant beard, and he was the first time that I'd really heard anybody talk about things outside of the medical community. Meaning, if you get sick, you take a prescription. If you do the the traditional medicine that he was into different form. First of all, how not to get sick, how to eat, and first time I had heard of green or matcha tea, and all these things that osteopath does, and I found it fascinating. I went to some of his classes. Guy Voyer, who was from France, he passed away last year. I guess he was one of the leading osteopaths in the world, but found it very interesting and fascinating going down that hole and learning about that side of the medical field. Obviously, you're expert in that, but as what we're going to talk about tonight is dermatology, because it affects golfers who are outside for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time. I mean, I took the day off, and my brother does club fitting out at Berkeley Hall, so I went out there and hung out from lunch till about 5:30 tonight. But golfers are notorious for being outside, so I wanted to have a world-class expert talk about skin and skin health and things to do beforehand and during and after. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and everybody's going to learn a lot.
Yeah, I think it's very relevant to your listener base.
So as far as, let's just talk about or jump in with some of the basics of the skin, the epidermis, the dermis, and the fat layer, just so people can have an understanding as we go into this, that they'll know what you're talking about. Can you describe the layers of skin so people have a
Absolutely.
better understanding?
So, from the outside in, we have the epidermis, which is a very, very, very thin layer, mostly dead skin cells, actually, that we shed off every, 30 to 35 days and whatnot, that all start in the basal layer of the skin. So, when we talk about basal cell carcinomas, they're named because those skin cancers are originating from the basal layer of the epidermis. The epidermis is here, this is the bottom layer of it. And that's where the skin cells, like the stem cells, have you. So they kind of mature from there, and then they're shut off into the environment. Once you get below that level, that's the dermis. And we don't really talk about that too much because we can't see it, but it's a little bit thicker than the epidermis. And then right when you get underneath that level, that's where your subcutaneous fat level is. One common question that I get when I'm removing a skin cancer from, like, say, someone's arm, and someone will ask, well, how deep do you have to go, doc? And it's really not that deep. It's maybe half a centimeter, maybe a little bit thicker if I'm working on someone's back where that dermis is pretty thick, but the skin isn't all that thick.
Yeah, and what people don't understand, there's varying levels of thickness. I would assume, being in and around the golf world for so long, the layer of fat or skin that's on your ear is obviously going to be much less than your arm, or as you said, your back.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I think that people just hear skin and they think the top layer, as you just said, and that's why I wanted to lead in with that question, because there's so many varying layers. The one thing that I learned and I wanted to ask you about was, just like your gut has a microbiota, isn't there? There's a biota that's on in and on top of your skin, isn't there, that makes you glow or makes you look
Mm-hmm.
nice and have that shiny appearance? Can you?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that too. But as far as the microbiome is concerned, when I think of microbiome, I think of organisms.
Hmm.
And there's definitely a lot of organisms that are very specific to the skin. Some of them can be pathologic if they grow out of proportion. One example of that is something that we call seborrheic dermatitis, which is a lot of syllables and a very fancy word for dandruff, basically. So that's when you get really flaky and itchy in your scalp. Sometimes people will get really flaky in their forehead, their eyebrows, around their nose and mouth, and around their ears. And it's really, really itchy, flaky, and irritating. But that's just a normal yeast that grows on everybody.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, some of us happen to be a little bit more sensitive to it. And that's when we get that kind of a reaction because there's an overgrowth of one component of the skin microbiome. Um, the same thing can be said about, Candida infections and all that stuff. If your skin microbiome is out of whack, then bad things can happen.
And I want to get into this more as we go on. What effect does diet have on your biota of your skin? And we know that it's been well documented. It's coming out now more in your gut, where you can get a big imbalance, SIBO, and other things that affect the lining of the stomach and the intestinal tract. How does diet affect, positive or negative, the layer of biota on the skin, or does it?
As far as the skin microbiome, I'm not sure that diet itself is going to have a tremendous effect, but I'm going to be the first to admit that I haven't been intentionally reading any studies on this. There are some dietary changes that can affect the skin. The Mediterranean diet is always going to be the king because there's a lot of really healthy fats that are good for the skin, good proteins. There are some studies coming out now that are more interested in taking collagen supplements to help supplement collagen loss in the skin. And interestingly enough, when I first heard it, I was like, that's crazy. It's going to get broken down in the stomach. There's no way. Oddly enough, it's been showing that there's an increased thickness to the skin. There's increased collagen in the skin. It's not super strong data by any means, but I'm sure that the people are going to be diving into it more and more moving forward because everyone's all about skin health and biorejuvenation and prevention instead of treatment. So that's all the rage right now.
And when people take collagen, would that be in the form of, if you go to your local Walmart or your Sam's or Costco, would be it the one that's in the container that's a powder form, or are there various
Yeah,
forms of
I mean, I
collagen
got one from Amazon. I've been
along with everything else nowadays? And does taking more than the recommended help, on the bottle or container or whatever it is they're taking? Have you gone down that road? I know we're getting a little bit away from golf.
yeah, I haven't gotten into the weeds of that yet, but I would assume that too much of a good thing is too much.
The as far as golfers being in the sun 6-8 hours a day, so at least four if they're playing 18 holes and they're doing a warm up and they're, you know play has gotten slower, what have you. Want to get into what can they do? Let's start very simply. What can golfers do, or people in general that are going out in the sun for extended periods of time? Are there things they can do beforehand? Uh,
100%.
and
Yeah.
if so, what would some of those things be?
Well, the number one is always going to be wear your sunscreen. And you're going to want to put your sunscreen on before you're actually in the sun, especially if you're using a chemical based sunscreen, which I'm assuming we're going to get into chemical
Yeah,
and
we'll get into chemical.
physical based sunscreens
Yes.
in a little bit. But the chemical based sunscreens need to be on your skin for a while so that they can get absorbed. Physical sunscreens are physical blockers, they just reflect sun. It doesn't matter as much when you put them on as long as they're getting on your skin and as long as they're being reapplied in 2 hours or within 2 hours or within if they're water resistant or very water resistant within a certain period of being in water. But I think the reapplication is where people get in trouble. I'm happy if people get sunscreen on, period, because that's the biggest problem I have is just getting people to wear sunscreen at all. But then again, reapplying on the turn, that's going to be a real lifesaver. And one of the tips that I always give to a lot of my golfers and tennis players and pickleballers and active people is not to forget the tops of ears, because if you're wearing a hat like you're wearing now, if you're not getting
Hmm.
the tops of ears in this area right in here, I see a lot of skin cancers and a lot of sun damage in that area, and it's not a very fun area to have surgery.
So for anyone who might be just listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, that's the side and the back of the neck.
Oh yeah,
That's
I should use my words.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
it's
tops of
okay. We're
the
on
tops of
video.
ear.
Yes, the video will be on YouTube. But as
Yeah.
far as if you're listening while you're driving, the tops of your ears and side of your neck, I would have to assume the back of the neck as well.
Yes. Yes. Very much so.
God, that's
And
got
then
to be.
for ladies if ladies are wearing their V-neck shirts, and don't forget the neck and the chest area too.
Hmm. The while we're on the topic, I mean, as far as sunscreen, and I got to look at my notes here because I was reading up on this some today. There's mineral based and then there's chemical based, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, the third type of sunblock would be clothing, which
Yes,
nobody's complaining about unless it's
right.
too hot. But there seems to be some in your field, some discrepancy on which one's better, chemical versus mineral. So can you first just tell everybody the difference between a chemical based sunscreen
Yeah,
and a mineral based?
sure. So chemical-based sunscreens are or have previously been the most common sunscreens that we see on the market because they're the easiest to use. They have broad spectrum coverage. They don't leave a funny white cast on your skin. They're just more cosmetically elegant. The downside to the chemical-based sunscreens, and actually the way that the chemical sunscreens work is once they're absorbed into your skin, when you go out into the sun, it absorbs UV radiation and then turns it into heat. And that's how it protects you from UV radiation. The physical or mineral sunscreens, those work by just reflecting sunlight. So that's why you can put those on whenever you feel like it because they don't need to be absorbed into your skin. There's not a chemical reaction, it's just a reflection. And that is why when you wear those sunscreens, it gives that white cast because it's reflecting light. So they have traditionally been a little bit more finicky to use because they're very, very thick. They're hard to rub in. They do give you better protection. There's fewer ingredients and they're less reactive. So on paper, they should be better. It's just now we're only now getting to the point where we have good tinted sunscreens, especially for darker skin. Because if you try and put a physical sunscreen on somebody with Fitzpatrick 5-6 skin, it's going to look ridiculous. But these tinted formulations and these nanoparticles or these nano formulations are making them a lot more, like I said before, cosmetically elegant and easier to use. Between the two the ingredients in chemical sunscreens tend to make people, they can form like a dermatitis of sorts in some people who are sensitive to them. So I have heard in the past, oh, I'm allergic to sunscreen. Well, you're probably allergic to one component of a chemical based sunscreen, not all sunscreens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, what would be some of the chemicals in the chemical version of sunscreens?
Oxybenzone and avobenzone are the two bad actors in that group for the most part.
And
But they're also in everything because they have great broad. The reason that these chemical sunscreens need to have more ingredients in them is because each ingredient will only block a certain portion of the UV wavelength spectrum.
mhm.
So they need to add more of them to get that full spectrum protection. And the
And
more ingredients you add, the more likely you are to react to one.
the chemical sunscreens are the one that would be, let's say, more greasy. Is that
I think that's probably more specific to your formulation and actually probably more of the physical ones that are really, really thick that you have to really rub in.
what would be, not that we're promoting and none of us get any kickbacks or anything, but what would be some of the more common examples of the chemical sunscreen that people be familiar with?
Yeah, if you anytime that you go into that dermatology recommended section of the store that has the CeraVe, La Roche-Posay, Gold Bond, Aveeno, Eucerin, any of all of those are great brands. They're
Mhm.
all going to have some physical sunscreen and some chemical sunscreen of some sort, probably many different kinds. Oh, and Neutrogena. Neutrogena recently actually came out with a new line of physical sunscreens, and they have, I think, 5 different colors from fair to like dark. So if you're trying to match your skin tone to a physical sunscreen, that's a good place to start. But there's a bunch of them on the market too.
Yeah, I know. You go in there. That's one thing I want to get at to you a little later is all the different brands. It's
It's
like
overwhelming,
I don't know what someone like me who has no idea, and I'm outside, and our area is we get sun. What is it, 270 some days a year? It's
right?
like I go in there and I might as well just flip a coin on which one I'm going to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Just another thing to get into in a little bit. So now the difference in the mineral, would that be zinc oxides and things like that?
There's only two. So there's only two physical sunscreens. There's zinc oxide and titanium dioxide.
And
Those
is
are the only two.
one better than the other? One beneficial to certain skin type, or is it
No,
just
not really.
why
But I
is
mean,
it?
people use zinc like in like Desitin, like baby butt cream. That's zinc. Zinc is very, very helpful for also repairing a damaged skin barrier, like with a diaper rash.
Mhm.
So we can use zinc to help repair, rashy skin, but also protect it from the sun. It's kind of a do it
And
all.
is the zinc oxide is what lifeguards use, isn't it, when they
Yeah,
put it
the
on their
white
nose?
nose is what you think of. Yep.
And why would they use that? And you know, so you see some people at the golf course too that they'll have that on their nose, especially if they're very light skinned. In our area, in particular, let's say their Irish descent tends to have very light skin. Scandinavian descent has very light skin. Well,
Mm-hmm.
anything north of the northern hemisphere tends to have lighter skin, which I am assuming would be more susceptible to damage in higher sun areas like we are as you get closer to the equator. Why do people who look for the maximum amount of sun protection or sun screen or block, whatever you want to term it, why would they use zinc oxide or something like that in their nose and their ears, lifeguards in particular, versus the chemical brand that most golfers probably have in their golf bag?
Good question. I personally, I like the physical sunscreens because I think that they just do a better job. There's no chemical reaction that's taking place. They're less likely to be reactive. So I would say that those people probably just listen to their dermatologist, and that's why they're using.
Yeah, because you go to the beach, and just since I was a kid, I can remember all the lifeguards would always have they'd have the white nose, and I remember the first time I saw as a kid, I'm asking my mom, why is that guy's nose all white? And she says, you know, it's a sunscreen. But yeah, it just seems like they use that. So you're saying that there is no, it's just a preference, personal preference
It's a
on.
it's a preference. If I'm gonna say one versus the other, I'm gonna go physical sunscreen every time.
Mhm. Why would people? What would make someone choose a mineral versus the chemical, or vice versa?
Just because I think that the efficacy with a physical sunscreen is there, it's better. And all the reasons I said before, like there's no chemical reaction, there's fewer ingredients, that they just tend to be cleaner in general.
Hmm.
Even though they are a little bit more finicky and harder to use, I do think that they are better.
The is there any differential that's notable in the science that you would have access to that would say reflecting is better and or not as good as blocking? As one, you know, the chemical one gets absorbed into the skin, the other one seems to I mean, before I confuse anybody listening, the chemical seems to block it where the mineral seems to reflect it. Is there any data or science that is leaning one way or the other? It's just, hey, this is just the differences in the two. They're both very effective.
I'm not going to try and badmouth any sunscreen, and I'm not familiar with any specific data that says this is why this is better than this one. It's just what my personal preference is, or why it would be better to physically reflect versus change into heat and dissipate
Mhm.
it that way. I guess I
And
have to get a
well, I tell you,
smarter dermatologist next
yeah,
time.
I'm not trying to get anybody to look bad, but where that question came from is like in the golf world, obviously, like anything has gotten very technical. There's a lot of tech involved in golf, and the tech has spurred on many, I'll call it debates. And you know, we've had 15, 20 years of the masses using technology to coach and to teach and do all these other things and do research. And basically, what it's boiled down to after all these years and all these mounds of data, you know, thousands and thousands of bits of data, millions of bits of data, it's like we're finding out that, well, certain people are going to swing that based off the way that they are. And you can't put individuals in certain brackets or certain silos because you just think that they should swing a certain way. Even if you say there's data that supports it, because there's a lot other data that says, well, they should swing this way. So it's like what we're finding out basically is everybody's individual, and we knew that from the beginning. And you have to teach or coach a person based off their individuality. Yes, there are some common denominators that fall into that they have to do if they want to play well. But and so I was just kind of curious if that's falling into the dermatology area. That is there a certain type of person, genetics, skin tone, etc., color, where they are on the globe that mineral works better than chemical, and is there certain areas that has been found that chemical works better than mineral? That's where that question, kind of the genesis of that question, came from.
I see what you're saying. Well, I guess in regarding individuals and your location, I think that the physical sunscreens are probably more stable for travel.
And fit physical is the chemical.
Physical, chemical,
Okay.
and mineral are the same.
Okay.
Chemical is its own thing.
Okay.
So a physical or mineral sunscreen, I feel like is going to be more stable for travel. I know a lot of golfers are travelers.
Mm-hmm.
Chemical, I don't trust them because there's just too many things that can happen. There's with so many added ingredients. Regarding genetic variations and locations on the planet, as far as skin health is concerned, I'm less worried about which sunscreen they're using and making sure that people who are genetically predisposed, either with a family history of skin cancers or personal history of having skin cancers, or have a very light complexion and spend a lot of time in the sun, I would rather they just wear a sunscreen. I'm not going to tell them that they're wearing the wrong one necessarily.
As everything gets blown out of proportion in today's world, be it social media or news reporting, and I don't bash the media, they have to sell ad space, so they have to sensationalize things quite often. But the reporting or the belief that sunscreen, whichever one you want to pick, chemical, mineral, etc., physical, you said, can be endocrine disruptors. Is that something that might have been a small one-off study and somebody grabbed it and ran with it and just caused a big
Yeah,
stir?
I think that, I mean, people, like you said, like to sensationalize things. And sometimes these big headlines will come and get published, and they probably shouldn't have been published in the first place because the methodology wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Like the controls weren't there. Like, there were some studies that were saying that the sunscreens were killing and bleaching the coral reefs, but they were looking at these concentrations of sunscreens that are like, you can't even measure them. So how can the way that the studies were, they were trying to deceive people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do have to be a little bit careful, but I don't think that anyone really has any space to villainize sunscreens because they're really, really great. As far as when it comes to systemic absorption, now there are a few more studies that do show that there's more systemic absorption with chemical-based sunscreens than there are with the physical or mineral-based sunscreens, and that's mostly due to particle size and absorption through the skin. But even saying that, the amount is minuscule, very, very small amounts.
Yes.
There was a study that was published a while ago that was discussing how much is absorbed, and they put all these people in a dark room and they put sunscreen on them every hour for like a week. No one's doing that. I'm not even doing that every hour for a whole week. So there was, of course, systemic absorption, but it really wasn't enough to cause any harm, even in that study.
Yeah, it makes sense. Usually, if you see one of these eye-catching headlines, sunscreen causes endocrine disruption, leads to whatever disease that it's going to lead to, and then you read the article and it's very loose and that it doesn't give any specific example, and then you finally get towards the latter half, the last quarter or last paragraph, and it says it will often give you, well, this is really based off this study, and if you want to look at it, here you go. It's like they bury it in the bottom that nobody's ever going to get to. And then if someone does take the time to look at it and the footnotes and everything else, it's like, yeah, that study really, as you said, was people that it was so little wouldn't even be considered a study by most people like yourself who are in that field, and say there's no control group, there was no study group, there was no nothing. How do you know? But it causes a giant frenzy. What do you tell people when they come into, they're playing golf, they're playing tennis, they're very active outside, and they say, look, I'm caught between getting my vitamin D exposure to the sun and wearing some sort of sun protection that's not clothing. It's not I don't want to wear long sleeves. It's in our area, it's 90 degrees plus June through September, and they don't want to wear long sleeves. So when somebody's kind of confused, how do you coach them through that? Like they want vitamin D absorption, they want the health benefits of being out in the sun, but they don't want the skin damage and some of the potential effects that come from that. It's a kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I mean, as far as vitamin D is concerned, it's completely fine and safe to take vitamin D supplements. That's what I have to do because I don't spend enough time in the sun because of my profession. But if someone's playing, nine holes of golf or 18 holes of golf, they're going to be getting enough sun, even if they're wearing sunscreen and long sleeves to get enough vitamin D. The people who really do or could consider being a little bit concerned about their vitamin D are people who don't go outside, who have an inside job, who don't do outdoor activities hardly ever. Those are the people who might consider like maybe going outside for 30 minutes without sunscreen on before getting concerned about it. But I mean, for the people who are probably listening to this podcast, you're probably getting enough sunlight to get enough vitamin D.
And that's even if they're wearing some type of sunscreen.
Even with sunscreen, yeah.
Can you speak to and I want to, along those lines, but going a little deeper on this, that you've got long form sun wavelength and you got short form wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
And and the whatever sunscreen they're wearing is meant to either block one or the other, or a combination of both, but you're still able to get a vitamin D absorption because it's getting absorbed in a different way. So, but can you elaborate a little more on the differences, but that somebody might have be reading, Google can be a great thing and it can be a terrible thing. So somebody who Googled it and said, well, I don't want to, I'm going to wear this sunscreen because it protects me against this, but I don't want to wear it because of this. So the basic question is the differences between long wavelength and short wavelength sunlight.
I think what you're referring to is UVA versus
Yes.
UVB. Yes. So they're a spectrum, of course. So UVA penetrates deeper into the skin, and is kind of, we talk about it in the form of causing more sun damage.
Mm-hmm.
And then UVB is more of a carcinogenic process where it can cause skin cancers. Neither one of them are good, and they're both doing bad things to our skin. So all of our sunscreens, when they say they're broad spectrum, are going to cover both. They're going to cover UVA and UVB. Now, the great thing about, like I said, the physical or mineral-based sunscreen is that zinc and titanium will block both UVA and UVB with just one ingredient. Whereas what I was referring to before, the chemical sunscreens, each component will block part of that spectrum, but you have to put 3 or 4 or 5 together to block the entire spectrum. But no sunscreen that is FDA approved can call itself full spectrum coverage without blocking UVA and UVB.
Very interesting. So you're basically covered for the most part. If you're going to go out and you're going to get a commercial or a sunscreen from a commercial retail shop, it's going to be protective.
If you're going to buy a sunscreen off a shelf in the United States of America, you're going to be covered.
There's been a lot in the, with the discussion on health in America as far as diet and things and food and et cetera. And it's brought to the forefront of any discussion about the differences in chemical structure of foods in particular on the US versus, let's say, Europe or Australia or other places around the world. Are there differences between sunscreens here in the US and sunscreens in, let's say, Australia, who, if I'm not mistaken, has the highest rate of skin cancer on the planet? Or is it across the world that basically everybody, if you go to Italy or if you go to Australia, you go to
if you want the best sunscreens, you go to Europe.
Is that right?
Because it's easier to get things approved. It takes a long time to get anything approved through the FDA here, so it's just hard to introduce a new anything without like a 10-year plus trial period of getting things approved. But in Europe, they're a little less stringent, so there's more products that you can have access to there.
Their trial and error period is much faster. If something gets approved, doesn't work.
That's what I'm understanding, at least.
Not surprising that they're, it's that old adage that you can sit there if you took 2 groups and you had one group of business people who sat there and talked about how to make the ideal widget, and you had another group that sat there and they said, okay, you guys, you're going to make a widget, and then whatever's wrong with it, take it out to market, and whatever's wrong with it, you fix it, tweak it, make it better, take it back to market, and keep going until you can't go anymore. The first group will sit there and basically not get anything done for a year because they're going to constantly sharpen the blade, and it's never going to get done. It's just going to curl, and they got to sharpen it again. But the group that gets that, okay, here, let's do this, let's get it out there and then get feedback, and then they can improve it that way, is going to get much further along in the developmental process of any product. And it sounds like Europe, as you said, they have better skincare product, or at least sunscreen things.
Things are faster to market there. Yes. And then that's everything. It's just faster. It doesn't mean it's better. It's just faster.
So it hasn't gotten better. Like the U.S. is doing more testing. The FDA is doing more testing to find out. We want to make sure this really
making
works.
Sure that things are safe, doing what they're supposed to do, not causing harm.
Okay, so a different process with goals of getting the product as good as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any difference, good or bad, between cream, sunscreen, and spray-on?
That's a layered question. I'm not a big fan of the spray sunscreens because I don't think that, for the most part, I don't think the majority of people are putting enough on. And what I've witnessed at the beach and stuff, people kind of just do a little zigzag spray across their back and call it good. Mm-hmm. But you need to be using a lot more sunscreen than that and rubbing it in. Just spraying it isn't going to cut it. Whereas like cream-based, you have to rub it in, so you're more likely to get it in all of the nooks and crannies and not miss a spot, because you really need to be using like 1.5 ounces of a cream-based sunscreen for your whole body. And that's kind of a lot if you think about it. And how do you know that you're getting that much out of a spray can? right? So there's
Yeah, it
one
makes sense.
layer of that. And then the second layer is that there have been some reports of benzene that have been reported in these aerosolized, actually most aerosolized products, not just sunscreens, but there were a couple brands that got in trouble earlier this year for having some detectable levels of carcinogen in their sunscreen. So I don't really trust most aerosolized things right now, including sunscreens.
Well, it makes total sense. I never thought of it that way. And that's kind of what one of the questions was, that if you're spraying it on, and you obviously, most people are going to have hair follicles, you know, your arms, guys, for the most part, their legs and other places, that if the air, the liquid molecule is catching onto the hair and it's not getting down to the skin, and even though you think you sprayed, your skin's not getting protected.
Right, exactly.
So that would make total sense. Do you think more people have gone the spray on route versus the cream route?
I do because it's just so much easier.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Not all the spray ones are bad. I just think that as long as you're using them right, there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, it makes total sense. If you're going to spray, make sure to rub it in and
Exactly.
not just put a coating on. And you know, and they make them that I mean, they're clear, so you really don't have a good idea of the coverage that you're
Of your
getting.
coverage, yep.
Yes, that makes total sense. Wow. See all the little things in here.
Yeah. The little nuances of dermatology, right?
Yes, you'd be surprised. The nuances of everything that I've learned on this show. I think I've learned as much, if not more, than anybody, and it's helped
Well,
me.
speaking of nuances, I'll tell you a little trick that I like too. For my golfers and everybody who's doing paddle sports, the sunscreen, like little deodorant sticks, the little waxy sticks, I like those to put on the back of hands.
Hmm.
So you can put it on without getting your hands slippery and goopy if you need to go grab a club or a paddle or what have you.
Yeah, I remember a lot of golfers used to put the whatever cream they had, they would put on a towel and then apply it to their face, because once they got their
The,
hands greasy, I call it greasy for lack of a better term.
yeah.
And I've seen this happen where people are at the driving range, they get themselves all lathered up and they go off the driving range. And next thing you know, they're swinging, there goes the club further than the ball.
That is funny.
I haven't seen that in a while, but it has happened.
Sounds like something I would do.
The As far as sun strength, obviously strongest during noon. So let's take the summer, because that's when most people are going to be playing their golf. We'll just start there and then we can expand out. Obviously, playing at high noon, or noon being sometime in your round. Let's say you tee off at 10, you make the ninth hole, make the turn at noon, and you're playing till 2. Worst part of the day as far as the angle of the sun and your skin health. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, when the sun is directly overhead, it's actually physically closer to Earth. So you just have less protection there and less, less shadowing because the sun's directly up on top of you. So yeah, there's definitely truth to trying to stay out of the sun between 10 and 4 as much as possible, but that's kind of prime golf time.
Yeah, you're going to hit at least a couple of hours. I mean, if you tee off at 8, you're going to catch the second half of that. If you tee off at 2, you're going to catch the first half of it. So it's kind of you got to pick your poison. Of
Hmm.
playing morning versus later afternoon, is there one that's beneficial to the other, or the
No,
sun
I
is
think
just
it's personal preference at that point. Yeah.
yeah, around here, everybody, we have more retirees around here. They seem to all play in the morning. That's why if I play,
Yep.
it's usually in the afternoon when there's nobody out there. But I was hoping maybe I was catching a subtle benefit by playing it. Well, I honestly, because I work in other industries, I usually don't play in the summertime till after 4 or 5 o'clock. That we'll go out after work and go get as many holes as we can. And it's actually better for us because in our area the wind kicks up
Hmm.
and it's breezy, and then the sun's not as its peak. It's still hotter than hell in the summertime, but it's not the heat of the day. But that's very interesting. One other topic is melanin and genetics. Different people around the world, obviously different skin tones, different melanin within their system and their genetics. How does and I a lot of friends. I'm very dark skinned, very Eastern European. And growing up, I grew up in Michigan. I don't think I ever wore sunscreen, except when I was a kid and we were at the beach and we were there for 6, 8 hours a day. My mom would make sure I had it on. But as I got older, whether it's probably you're going to probably roll your eyes and say, not a good move. I don't think I ever wore sunscreen as I got older, even when I was playing golf. And I just didn't burn. Later in talking to you, and I've had conversation with you about this, just because you don't burn, that's not necessarily means that you're not doing damage to your skin.
Exactly.
Can you elaborate on that and let people understand that better? Because I'm sure they're probably wondering, well, how does that happen?
Right. So
If there's no noticeable damage.
I'll back it up a little bit even further, that the way that a tan develops is that you're exposed to sunlight, your cells and your cellular DNA is exposed to UV radiation, which actually causes DNA mutations and DNA damage. As a result of that stress and that damage, the cell, actually, the melanocyte cell turns on its little machinery and starts pumping out melanin, and it gets put, it's like a blanket over the nucleus of your skin cells, and that's what creates a tan. So you actually have to have sun damage in order to create a tan. Now, that's different than somebody who is naturally a Fitzpatrick 5, that you don't have to develop a tan to get that pigment. That's their baseline. But basically, if you are getting tan, that means you are technically damaging your cellular DNA to cause you to tan. So, having said that, even though you may not burn, you're still acquiring sun damage and, cellular or DNA mutations that can, down the road, lead to skin cancers.
Mm. And is one thing that I read that as I was doing a little bit of homework, so I could sound somewhat intelligent on this episode, was you don't necessarily have to have sunburn or to cause skin cancer, or skin cancer doesn't necessarily, sunburn doesn't necessarily lead to skin cancer, which
Right.
seems to be a common belief that it does.
Well, it's true to an extent. So if you do get sunburns, that's worse than if you didn't get sunburns, but you don't have to have a sunburn to induce enough damage to get a skin cancer.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional thought is that your cumulative lifetime sun exposure and your sun damage over your entire lifetime is what causes what we treat most commonly in my office, which are the actinic keratoses or precancers. They're these little kind of sharp little painful red little papules that you get usually on the temples and stuff. And we freeze those with liquid nitrogen. Sometimes we treat them with a field treatment, because if we don't treat those, they all have a risk of turning into a squamous cell carcinoma. Your lifetime exposure of sun is going to increase your risk of developing those lesions.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you have brief, intermittent, extreme sun exposure, like blistering sunburns, like I used to get when we used to go to Florida for vacations, coming from Missouri, it wasn't summer until I had a blistering sunburn. Well, that's worse than if you grew up in Florida and had sun exposure every day, but neither one of them is ideal, if that makes sense.
Is it true that the deadliest skin cancers are not caused by the sun?
That's a little tricky because we think of melanoma as being the worst one, and that's definitely related to sun exposure, but also definitely has a familial genetic component to it too. So you can still get a melanoma and not have any sun exposure. You just kind of were dealt a bad genetic card.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, that one, melanoma, and most of the skin cancers that we deal with are directly related to the sun most of the time. Now, if you think about Jimmy Buffett, he died of Merkel cell carcinoma, and that's a completely different beast. That is a bad, bad, bad skin cancer.
So is more skin cancer genetic as opposed to getting it from just staying out in the sun all the time?
From my experience, it's the opposite.
Huh.
When I see a lot of skin cancers that are genetic, that's when I start seeing younger people with skin cancers, like in their 20s and 30s, which of course you hate to see. But for the most part, it's genetic, meaning either you just have a predisposition to developing those skin cancers, or maybe you're just Irish with blue eyes and red hair and freckles.
Well, like I asked that is like the BRCA gene for breast cancer. If you either have it, and if you do have that gene, then you're highly, highly predisposed to get breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was when I went to Johns Hopkins for my cancer review, I think that they tested me for a genetic predisposition for prostate cancer when I had that, because my mom's mom had breast cancer when she was in her 40s, and they wanted to see if there was a genetic that might have somehow skipped in the family, and I got it. But I had always wondered if that was the same for cancers in general, in particular, as we're talking obviously about skin, and is there a genetic predisposition versus being out in the sun excessively as most of people in our area and people around the world who get outside and play golf are going to do, at least when they're out in the sun. If you're in the UK and it's overcast, and the sun, obviously the UV rays are still getting through the clouds. You just don't feel it, but obviously that is not the same playing in Scotland as it is in Hilton Head, South Carolina. It's quite a bit different, but very interesting stuff that I think, and as we learn more with all the technology and sharing of information with the internet, it's advancing very quickly, and things that we didn't know 5 years ago, we're finding out today in various disciplines of the medical industry and everything else. It's fascinating to kind of follow. Kind of a cool time to be alive.
Right. One of the interesting things about, or one of the cool things about dermatology and why I got into it is because it's so easily studied. Because you just look at it, it's right there. It's easy to do a biopsy. It's easy to look under the microscope. You don't have to open anybody up to look at their stomach or liver or anything like that. So it's we learn things fast in dermatology.
When someone has a skin cancer, or they have a skin disease or issue with their skin, we'll classify all those as problems with the skin. Does it always start on the top layer and work its way down, or are there some that start at the lower levels and then work their way up?
As far as well, the skin cancers are always going to start in the skin if it's a primary skin cancer. I mentioned before that basal cells will originate in the basal layer. So if the top layer of the skin is just dead skin cells and you work your way down to the basal layer, that's kind of like what we call the stem cell layer. Well, that's also the same layer where the melanocytes live too.
Mm-hmm.
So both of those are going to originate in that layer. They don't always grow in the same pattern though. Sometimes basal cells and squamous cells and all of them can grow out of the skin, or sometimes they grow across the surface of the skin kind of just in a wide fashion, and sometimes they go deep and go other places in the body. That's the last place we want them to go. They can and melanoma is known for kind of just acting the way it wants to act, and that's why it's so scary.
So it just spreads rampantly wherever it feels like it can find an avenue to spread itself and to grow.
Yeah, and speaking to genetics, there's different genetic mutations that we can test for whenever we do diagnose a melanoma. And there's a test that we can run that can, based on the number of mutations that are present or absent, can put it through this algorithm and basically give you almost a prognosis of sorts that tell you, well, this one is a type 1A, meaning it doesn't really want to behave badly, or it's a 2B, meaning it's aggressive. Keep an eye on that one because it doesn't want to behave like it should. So that's one of the benefits of being able to test the skin and test these mutations, is that we can take the biopsy that I've already taken from somebody and then run this genetic test without having to do anything more invasive on the patient themselves.
How often should people be getting looked at? Should they come in for an exam? Like, everyone goes in for a yearly physical, especially once they get into their 40s or 50s. You go and get everything checked. And now, they're recommending colonoscopy starting. I think they bumped it down to 45.
Yeah.
And every 5 years or 10 years after that. How often should people be going in to get their skin looked at by someone like yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's highly variable. But for the most part, when you're reaching your 40s and 50s, I recommend an annual skin check, just a full body skin check where we just look you over from head to toe, just to get a baseline if you've never had one before. If everything checks out perfectly fine and there's no family history of skin cancers, or if you're maybe not a golfer or what have you, then once a year is fine. But if somebody has had a recent diagnosis of a skin cancer, I'm definitely going to want to see them more often, because if they've had enough risk factor exposure to induce one skin cancer, then they've had enough to get another one too. So I'll usually do every 3 to 6 months for a while. And if I don't find anything, then slowly extend that out to annually. But for the most part, once a year.
And you do excising when you see something.
Yeah, if I see something during a skin check, if I see something that I find concerning, I'll biopsy it during that visit and then go from there. But yeah.
How well, I guess that answers my question. Like, I thought that there might be layers of, like, levels that you would go in and say, okay, we took this, we didn't find anything, but I think that it's beneficial that we remove this little area. Or, I mean, how aggressive do you get? Is that based off somebody's time out in the sun, skin? There's a ranking of what is it, 5 levels, or I can't remember, certain levels of skin color.
Right. It's Patrick levels.
Yes.
Yeah, everything for me is very individualized. For somebody who say like is a Fitzpatrick 5, so very, very dark skin. Once maybe every 2 years is fine for me to see them. But I guess like if I have somebody coming in and I've never diagnosed a skin cancer, but every single time they come in, I freeze 40 little pre-cancers on their temples, and I'm going to have them come in every 6 months because they go a year, maybe one of those pre-cancers is going to turn into something else in that time frame. So it just kind of depends on who the patient is and also how aggressive they want to be too.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in play there. How
Mm-hmm.
often are they out in the sun? What is their
Yep.
ranking 1 through 5 on the spectrum?
Yep. What's your handicap score?
Is I don't know how to. I'm just gonna the oiliness of somebody's skin. Does it play a role or is it irrelevant? Like I asked that because when I was a kid that went to see a dermatologist just to get a checkup, and they said I think I was 15 or 16 because I was out all summer long. I was either caddying or playing golf or basketball or whatever we were playing, but I was outside all day long. And my mom said, we need to get, and we have birthmarks. I look like a constellation on my body. I've got birthmarks everywhere. She said, it's a good idea to get checked. But the doctor told me, he said, you have very oily skin and you probably hate it now because it probably leads to more acne than you want as a teenager. But as you get older, it's going to be very good. But did that benefit me at all as far as skin protection, having oilier skin and again, being Eastern European descent?
It doesn't protect you from the sun, but it does protect you from aging.
Oh, well, there we go. If I didn't have white hair in my beard, I might look even younger.
There you go.
Along that lines, one of the questions came in about, and we talked about tanning, that you said it is at the molecular level, it is a damaging, or at the cellular level, it's a damaging of the cells, and it's a protective mechanism. What about spray tans or we'll call it fake tanning?
Mm-hmm.
Does that provide a level of protection that having a suntan would do?
It's a really interesting question. So, yes and no. So, wearing just clothes with no UPF in them offers you like 5 SPF because it's some protection. That's about what you're going to get with a spray tan. It's about SPF 5 just because it's staining the skin. So that stain is just another level that UV radiation needs to penetrate through to get to the cells. So it's a little bit of protection. However, when you like the day that you get a spray tan, while that whole chemical reaction is happening and it's staining those cells, you're actually more susceptible to sun damage. So the day you get a spray tan, stay out of the sun.
Yeah, don't get your spray tan and run out to the beach and hang out for 3
Right?
hours.
Please. But I'm a big proponent of spray tans. It's the only healthy tan.
How what SPF levels? That's a question that's been bouncing around in my head. And I get that often that, hey, you're in golf, you've been around a long time. What SPF should we get? I'm like, I have no idea. Call Dr. Cassie. But
I prefer SPF 30 at least on
okay.
just a regular day if you're just going to go about your day and not do anything special. If you're going to be spending a lot of time outside and you know you are, I would at least put on a 50. But like I said before, I'm happy if you're using any sunscreen.
Mm-hmm.
But I would prefer at least a 30 or 50.
And how often should people reapply?
Every 2 hours, at least.
So 2 hours, 50 if you know you're going to be out for extended periods of time. Maybe if you're playing tennis and you're not out as long, or you're going gardening, or you're going to go for a walk, or whatever you're going to do, you can get away with 30. Yeah, so golfers really need to be lathering on 50 every
right
before they start. Let it absorb. Maybe at the turn, if they're going to go practice after, maybe you put it on before you go again.
Right. Now there are actually oral supplements that can kind of help boost your sunscreen too. The one that comes to mind to me is called HelioCare, and it has this
They had that at the
polypodium.
PGA show not long ago.
Yes, it's yellow.
Yes.
But it has polypodium leucotomos in it, which is a plant that actually can help prevent and repair oxidative damage from the sun when you're outside for prolonged periods of time. They also make it with niacinamide, which also can be protective for the skin as well. And it's just an oral supplement that you would take. I think you can take it before and after. I don't take it every day, but I take it whenever I'm planning on going like to a beach or something like that. HelioCare is the one that comes to mind. I know there's others on the market too.
Yeah,
but that can also help.
They were passing out samples. I think it was last year at the PGA show. I could be mistaken. I do remember getting samples of that. I'm a guy and I'm dark skinned, so I said, I don't need this stuff. So I gave it to my girlfriend, who's a big tennis player. I said, "Here, you eat more easily than I do. Why don't you use this and tell me how it works? If it works, then maybe I'll take it." And I think she used it and was very happy with it.
Yeah, great.
Do you know? And I only know this because I used to take niacin. Niacinamide, I'm assuming is in the family of niacin, or is as
It's a metabolite of niacin, actually. And the benefit of taking niacinamide, sometimes called nicotinamide, over niacin is it doesn't make you flush.
yes, that was my next question. Is if there was flush free and there was flush, and when you take anyone who's ever taken flush niacin, it feels like you get a massive rush of
Yeah.
blood to the top of your skin, like it goes
Yeah,
from
it's
in.
like taking a pre-workout. It's crazy.
Yes, it's like unbelievable. Like, what the hell is happening? Almost like you're getting, the feeling you get of the prickles when you get a foot falls asleep. That's like all over your body. And you're
Yeah,
like,
it's
God, this
pretty
is not
awful.
fun.
So yeah,
Awful.
niacinamide or nicotinamide should not do that.
Okay, then
Hold on.
that kills my next. The question I was going to ask you is that does the blood rushing to the surface aid in that? So if it's flush free, then it's not
Then you're not,
doing that.
yeah. Nope. Sorry, my head let my dog out.
You're okay. Why it seems like skin cancer is constantly on the rise. I don't know if that's another headline grabber that seems to be making its way through media channels and
Yeah, actually,
TV
the
shows.
headline grabber recently is that the skin cancer that is killing people more often these days is squamous cell, not melanoma anymore.
What is the difference?
So melanoma is the one that we're always scared of, the black spot, the one that can kind of go everywhere and is kind of reckless. Squamous cell carcinomas are more common, but they tend to be caught at a later date, or they tend to be ignored for longer than a big dark black spot because we're catching melanomas earlier and earlier and earlier. So people are just not dying from them because we're excising them early and everything's fine. But it's
Hmm.
the squamous cells that are actually starting to become the bad actors. These
Do you have a theory on why that is?
squamous cell carcinomas, they can go other places in the body, not normally like as aggressively as melanomas necessarily, but they kind of course down nerves and blood vessels, and they can get into the lymphatics and stuff way more than a basal cell ever would.
Wow, very
And so
interesting.
it's these just little skin lesions that people are ignoring kind of for the most part, and they have time to just do bad things.
Why do you think the rise in skin cancer be one or the other? Do you have any theories? Because you've been doing this a long time, and you've seen a lot. You've worked at some, educated very well. You worked in Florida. You worked in South Carolina. You're from Missouri. Do you have a theory on
But
on
yeah,
why this is
it's
on the
mostly
rise?
a factor of the generation that I'm seeing now is primarily retired people who didn't have sunscreen at all when they were younger.
Hmm.
And they were using baby oil and iodine. They didn't even know that they should be protecting themselves from the sun. So right now, I'm seeing that generation's skin cancer incidence peaking at this age. I'm hoping that in the next couple of decades that the incidence of skin cancer decreases because we know more about it now and we are better educated to because we're doing this podcast. We're trying to educate people about, skin protection. So I'm hoping that in the future that starts to decline again.
One of the big discussions, and we touched on it a little, not a short time ago, was diet and its effect on things. And I have a lot of friends who are in the holistic world. That Paul Chek was their teacher. There is some evidence, I would assume, at least what they tell me, and you correct me on this. If I'm not mistaken, you get a new epidermis about every 3 months where it regenerates itself. That your some skin
The
cells die
skin
off.
cells.
Yes.
Yeah, so that basal layer that we were talking about before, sorry, I'm taking the dogs in and out again. The basal layer is where those cells originate from. It takes about 30 to 35 days for those cells to go from that basal layer to be shed off the top of the skin.
So the theory is, at least that these guys tell me, is if you're eating a subpar diet, let's just say that the typical American diet, you're eating fast food for lunch 3 days a week, you're eating highly processed carbohydrates, you might not even know what a vegetable is, or if you do, you're eating maybe a salad from a grocery store once or twice a week, and you're not really eating high quality protein, that the regenesis of your skin cells is subpar, so it's going to be more susceptible to damage. I can see the basis for that, but is your opinion is in the medical side of it and not just the holistic side? Because obviously there are two sides. Not that they fight each other. I think they work in unison a lot. But from what you're seeing in the medical practice and what the medical research shows, is that a viable argument, or thing that people can focus on, a better diet for improved ability to
Absolutely.
fight these things?
Yeah, and the way I want to answer this is that the way that we learn about how important something is by studying what happens when it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how we have, we have a whole chapter in our dermatology book about nutritional deficiencies and how they can affect the skin. So absolutely, I could tell you XYZ vitamin deficiency can cause this symptom, but we're not here for a board review. So yeah, eating the appropriate nutrients, in particular proteins too, if your goal is skin rejuvenation, which is a big topic right now. So high protein content, and this is kind of a little tangent, but a lot of people are on these GLP-1 analogs or whatever, what have
Yeah.
you, and people are losing a lot of weight fast, and they're also losing their hair with it because they're not eating enough protein. And so if their body is stressed, and when our bodies become stressed, one of our responses is to stop growing things that our body doesn't consider important.
Mm-hmm.
And really unfair, our body doesn't think our hair is important.
Yeah, I'm a big Peter Attia fan, and I listened to one of his discussions on GLP-1, and a lot of it, or they said they're finding out now, is a lot of that weight loss is muscular weight loss. And that makes total sense that if you're not digesting enough protein, obviously the muscular system is going to take the brunt of that. And then once that's depleted or nearing depletion, or at least significantly reduced, then the hair follicles and everything else are going to be next on that list. So you might be a different pant size, but what's the damage you're doing internally? The first time that I was aware of the effect of diet on body, bones, skin, etc., was Weston Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And that was very interesting that here's a guy, I think roughly 100 years ago, that went around the world to study different diets, mostly indigenous cultures. I don't know if you've read that book or not.
I haven't.
From what I can gather, just listening to different podcasts and people in the medical industry and around that know that book very well, that is kind of the genesis for the paleo, primal, all those different diets. Because what he did was he went to the northern UK that were basically in the 20s, areas that had been untouched by civilization. He went to the Swiss Alps. He went to the Indians in the southwest of the United States. He went to Maoris in the Pacific Southwest. And what he found was all these indigenous tribes who had their food that was no preservatives, no anything, they lived off the land, etc., that their dental, they needed no dental care. Their rate of cavities was like less than 2%. Their rate of cancer was less than, I think, 3%, and their rate of heart disease was less than 3%. And it's like, how do you full dental arch development, no need to pull wisdom teeth, and perfect smiles, and health related and everything else. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is absolutely fascinating that this has been known since the 20s, or somebody had it and wrote the book on it. And here we are today, 100 years later, and people are still fighting about what you can put in food. But as you said, if you want healthier skin, if it's getting rebuilt from what you're putting in your body, be very, very careful about what you're putting in. Do you have recommendations as far as your skin health? Is there certain things that people should be eating, and or if they can't get enough of it in their diet, that they can supplement with it?
Specifically, I can't say that anything outside of a normal, healthy, balanced diet is going to be anything crazy. I do take vitamin D myself because I'm not in the sun enough.
Mm-hmm.
I was borderline low when I had my baseline vitamin D tested. Now I'm fine. But I also take a hair growth vitamin called Nutrafol.
Maybe I need that.
It's a great, I love it. I recommend it to a lot of people who have hair growth issues. And I take it for just to not lose hair, but also it's an all around great multivitamin. But you were asking earlier, I need to put a little asterisk on this about thyroid health and thyroid function. Nutrafol does have biotin in it. Biotin has been shown that it can alter your thyroid function panel
Thyroid disruptor.
if you're getting your blood work done. So if you do take a vitamin like biotin or Nutrafol that has biotin in it, you want to stop taking that a week or two before you get blood work drawn.
Very interesting.
Also, if you take very, 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 very high doses of biotin, it can mask a heart attack. It can make your cardiac enzymes falsely low. So if you were to have a heart attack and you had your blood work drawn, you could be having a heart attack and they wouldn't know because your cardiac enzymes wouldn't elevate if you take a lot of it.
Wow. Is there any differences between men and women on skin care, skin health, at least as far as what they should be
Not
doing
really. As
protect
far
you?
as like what you should be doing on like product wise, no. So I think that like skincare targeted to men probably just smells a little bit manlier, but the products themselves are not any different.
One thing about aging skin, which obviously the bulk of who I coach and the bulk of who I'm sure you're seeing in your practice is retirees. Elasticity of skin. We talked about collagen earlier, and then the fat layer being the lowest level of the skin. As we age and we start to lose those things, and we talked about supplementing with collagen, and becomes less elastic. And the one thing a friend of mine showed me about squeezing, anybody can pinch the skin on their hand and lift it up, and you let it go, and how long it takes to rebound shows how elastic your skin is, or you're drifting towards it being non-elastic, which means obviously you're aging. Is there anything that the listeners out there can do to keep their skin more elastic? Should they drink more water? Should they, obviously collagen we'll say was one of them, but anything,
Yeah,
hydration or
hydration is super important. We start losing collagen in our skin in our 20s, and it just progresses from there. It's super unfair. And then with sun exposure, we also start to break down elastin that's in our skin too. The good thing about collagen is that we can increase collagen in our skin by using certain products like retinols. There's certain, peptides and stuff that can help too. Different treatments you can get that are cosmetic treatments targeted to generate collagen. There's even fillers that are supposed to help you generate collagen too.
mm-hmm.
So all of those things are collagen focused because we know that we can do it. What happens with elastin is we haven't really figured out a way to regenerate or to replenish elastin once it's been broken down. So that kind of plays into the UVA part of photoaging that we were talking about earlier, that once you damage the elastin, it's pretty much gone until we can figure out how to fix it. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah,
But hydration is definitely one, and using products that can help generate collagen,
and
definitely.
you had mentioned the Mediterranean diet. How much of a role would something like olive oil or a Mediterranean diet's high in fishes, or supplementing with a fish oil if you're not a fish person in your you don't like it in your diet? Does that help with the elasticity and keeping that as we age?
I haven't read or seen anything that would prove that, so I can't really say yes or no.
Okay, not then I won't press you. um, So we talked, put your sunscreen on before you go play. Make sure you eat a healthy diet so when your skin does get damaged, it can regenerate itself correctly and be as strong, or hopefully as strong as possible. What about moisturizing your skin? Let's say someone who played golf, they played tennis, they went waterboarding out to the beach, et cetera, fill in the blank. Afterwards in the evening, what type of skincare products do you recommend for people who are spending a lot of time out in the sun?
Good question, because the first step is actually in the shower. It's your body wash. I know that, like, you're outside, you're hot, you're sweaty, you want to wash the day away, and you want to use like a super potent soap and just feel clean, but you don't want to wash away all of your body's natural oils. So, the Irish Spring, throw it away. You want something that's gentle, unscented. Um, and then after the shower, as when your skin is still damp, that's the prime time to moisturize. For the most part, moisturizers don't add a ton of moisture to the skin. They mostly trap what's there.
Mm-hmm.
So you still want your skin to be a little bit damp before you put moisturizer on. Otherwise, it's just going to sit on your skin and kind of feel icky, especially when it's as humid as it is down here.
God, so all right, so it feels again that like greasy when I have the CeraVe. I think I texted you one day and said, "Is CeraVe okay?" And I'm finally listening. I am stubborn. 50, turned 52 a few months ago, but I do eventually come around. And I said, "Hey, is this CeraVe? Should I get this?" And you said, "Yes, definitely. Nice to see you
That's
finally
okay.
listening." But yeah, I do dry off, and then I put that on. So you're saying put that on before I dry off.
Well, dry off, just pat dry. You don't
Okay.
want to be wet, wet, but like just not like your skin's dry, dry.
And the difference between, because I had a friend that used to put before he toweled off, he would rub baby oil on himself while he was still wet, and then he would towel. Is there a difference between?
I wonder if your friend heard that from me, because that's what I do too.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah, especially in the winter months whenever it's so dry and
Mm-hmm.
we have the heaters running and all that stuff, and it's just hard to not everyone's so dry and itchy these days. So yeah, if you're going to use that trick, I put the baby oil in the shower, and before I dry off, I put that on. Then I dry off, and then I put moisturizer on.
Is there a benefit to one over the other, or is it just personal preference?
Just personal preference and just making sure that I don't dry my skin out too much.
As far now, this is usually a question I have. When we do an emergency 9 rapid fire question, I sometimes will ask people, do you shower in the morning or in the evening? Obviously, it's going to be somewhat based on your physical activity during the day. Is there a difference in moisturizer that you would put on in the evening after a day of being out in the sun versus what you might put on in the morning before you leave the house?
If I'm a nighttime shower, so I just moisturize. But if I do take a shower in the daytime, instead of moisturizing, I use sunscreen.
Really?
But that's me because I have to be that crazy.
If somebody came to you and they said, we'll use me as an example. I come to you and I say, you obviously know me, and I'm stubborn as can be, and I haven't done anything, but I'm trying to be a better person by taking better care of my skin. What would be a protocol that you would prescribe to me to follow? You don't necessarily have to give a brand name unless you think there's a brand that's better than the other, but what would you say? I want you to put this on in the morning. If you're going to go play golf, I want you to put this on, and then obviously you go home, you clean up, and then you can put this on later for to help the skin recover.
Sure. I'm all about moisturization in every single step. So first in the morning, wash your face, put your sunscreen on. Make sure you have a sunscreen in your bag that you take with you so that you can reapply later. And I like to keep it simple. That's it. That's really all you need to do in the morning is just make sure you're wearing your sunscreen. And then whenever you're done with any kind of physical activity, or if you get home for the night, then just wash. And then whatever nighttime cream you use, it doesn't have to have sunscreen in it. And I'm not partial to any, well, I am partial. I like La Roche-Posay products, but that's it. That's really all you have to do. If you don't have any active skin issues like acne or, anything like that, then you don't have to do anything too special.
So I am on the right track. I'm sitting there every time I put my stuff on. I'm like, God, I need to message doc to see what I'm doing right or wrong. Here's an example. I have the CeraVe, however you
Uh-huh.
say it, and I usually put that on in the morning. Obviously, if I like today, I played or hit golf balls and it was 75 degrees out in the middle of winter. I'm not complaining, but it's nice to have the cool winter. I wish it was a little cooler. But so I'll take a shower tonight, and then I'll put the CeraVe on, and the pump worked for a while. It doesn't work anymore, so don't spend the money on the pump. But I also have the facial, the PM, that comes in a smaller bottle that I guess is helps regenerate. I don't know if that's BS or marketing, but I thought since I got you on the show, I would ask you about that as well.
I'm not sure how those two products in particular are different. I just know that the PM one is designed to be used in the face,
Okay,
and like
that's why I put
the big blue tub is more for body.
Okay, so I am doing it correct.
You are.
And my stubbornness, I'm trying. I'm learning from you. It's taken me a few years to come around and listen, even though I know you're very good at what you
It's
do.
working.
It's
Hey,
working.
I'm very patient. It's fine.
What about like some people had messaged me and said, ask about Vaseline. Is that no good? Is it okay that it holds moisture in? Or
It
what would you
kind of
rate
depends on
that?
what you're using it for. I use Vaseline all the time, but I use it post-op when people have just had an excision, and they use that for their wound dressing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also helpful for people who are very, very, very dry. If you're not very dry, you probably don't need to be using Vaseline for moisturizer, especially on the face,
Mm-hmm.
unless you need it, because it can be occlusive and can cause acne if used a lot. But I reserve it for like if I use my retinol too many days in a row, so I'm a little dry and flaky, and then I'll use it. But otherwise, it's mostly for post-op for me.
For those who are out in this, they're active outdoors. Again, we'll use golfers as an example since we're on a golf podcast. There's no way to. I mean, you can mitigate the sun damage because if you're going to be out, your skin's going to wrinkle. It's going to eventually show the wear and tear of the sun beating up on your skin is going to eventually beat it down. And I've seen plenty of studies. Not that I read the whole study, but where they show some. I think it was in Japan, people who really didn't spend a whole lot of time outside, 70, 75, 80 years old versus people who, let's say, were in the American Southeast or Southwest that were outside all the time, golfing, whatever they're going to do. And it was unbelievable. One looked like a worn out saddle on a horse. And you had these people in Japan that they looked like they were 40 years old and they were 80. So there's really, I mean, it's conclusive across the spectrum, I believe, from people in your industry, which is very rare that everyone's going to agree on the same thing, that the sun is going to beat your skin up if you don't do something. But
100%.
at least we've talked about tonight a lot of things that you can do pre-round. Definitely do reapply during the round. Once you're done, you clean up, shower up. Here's what you can do to moisturize, to keep that moisture in your skin. Even in our area where it's very humid in the summer, keeping that moisture in it is going to be extremely beneficial.
Mm-hmm. I think you nailed it.
Jeez, I do listen.
The cliff notes.
For everyone that says I don't listen, I do listen, at least for the hour or so, that hour and a half we've been talking. I do listen, especially when it comes to experts. And I've known Doc Cassie for a long time. Anything that we missed that people should know about when it comes to their skin and being outside?
We covered a lot of it, I think. I'm trying to think if I didn't know of anything else. Well, one of the great things that I've noticed is that most golf clothing brands now, the clothing has a UPF factor in it.
You know, how do they? I always wondered how they do that.
So the UPF is a measure of how much of the UV rays actually penetrate through the fabric.
Is it some type of special coating they put on the fabrics during the processing, or is it something?
I think I think that they do it a couple of different ways. One of them is the weave of the fabric, how tight the weave is. Also, I think that there is an added component that coating they can put on. Mm-hmm. That like washes off after so many washes.
Yeah, the first time I saw that, it was roughly 20 years ago in an airplane. You know, you get the catalog with all the cool stuff in it, and that was in there. And ironically enough, at the same time, because obviously golfers get the golfer's tan, you know, around your ankle because of low socks. Yeah. And of course, you get it around your arm. And at that time, I was contemplating or trying to look into material that would allow the sun to get through so that you didn't get such a bad tan line. And I saw that come out, and it was spreading like wildfire. And I said, there goes my idea. And that was never going to pass. You know, you can get better tan if you play golf, if you wear this thin shirt versus wearing this shirt that's going to block it, and you can be healthier. So maybe
that's the opposite idea.
Yes. It's been fun to catch up. And I think everybody is going to take a lot from this. Hopefully they save their skin. And if they do have damage, and if you're here in the low country, look up Dr. Cassie. I will have, as we always do, links to you and all your your social media stuff we'll have on there, the business that you're at here in the low country. Everybody, she's Hilton Head, Okeechobee/Bluffton, right? Mm-hmm. And one in Beaufort.
Yep.
If they want to reach out to you to make an appointment, come see you, whether it's at yearly, annual review of them, or they want to talk to you, consult, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
My main office phone number, it's 843-705-0840, or any of the office phone numbers, but Dermatology Associates of the Low Country is my office.
We will have that, everybody. If you are considering, then it's worth it, because you don't want to go to her when you have a problem. Better to do preventative maintenance, as I learned very scary. The best defense is to find anything early. And, Or actually, if you step back further, the best defense is to not let it get bad.
It's prevention.
But if you miss that, the next step is to find something early so that Cassie can get it cut out and take care of it and get you healthy again. So be sure to reach out to her and give her a call. She's very good, obviously, that we've heard tonight. And she has the doctor mantra of very caring. I can speak for that.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
So thanks for coming on, everybody. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you next time. Okay.